The morning started like any other boring day at the Galactic Council headquarters. Admiral Vexter was sitting in his big chair, sipping his morning coffee and trying not to fall asleep during another endless meeting about trade routes and tax policies. The other alien council members were scattered around the massive chamber, some dozing off, others playing games on their personal devices when they thought nobody was looking. Then everything changed in an instant. Vexter's coffee mug slipped from his three-fingered grip and crashed to the floor, sending hot liquid splashing across his boots. But he didn't even notice. His 6 compound eyes were locked on the enormous holographic display that dominated the center of the room, where moments before it had shown empty space around their most secure planet. Now, there was something that shouldn't exist. A ship. Big, dangerous-looking ship that had just appeared out of nowhere. Dr. Nexera, the Council's top expert on ancient alien technology, jumped up from her seat so fast that her chair toppled backward. Her normally calm voice cracked as she spoke. That can't be real. Nothing can just appear in that location. We have 17 different layers of protection around Nexus Prime. Quantum barriers, energy shields, detection grids that can spot a dust particle from 3 star systems away. She was right to be shocked. The space around their capital world was more heavily defended than any other location in the galaxy. It would take an entire fleet of the most advanced warships working together for months just to get close to those defenses. And even then, they'd be detected long before they posed any real threat. But this ship had just popped into existence, like someone had drawn it into reality with a magic pen. The vessel itself was unlike anything in their vast databases of known spacecraft, where most ships in the galaxy were built for function over form. This one looked like it had been designed by someone who understood that sometimes fear was the best weapon. Its hull was dark and sleek, with curves that suggested speed and angles that promised violence. Energy readings coming from the ship were so intense that their most sophisticated scanning equipment was having trouble processing the data. Admiral Vexter felt his 2 hearts start beating faster as he stared at the readouts. His species had been exploring space for over 2,000 years. They had encountered hundreds of different civilizations, cataloged thousands of ship designs, and maintained the largest database of spacecraft technology in known space. But this ship didn't match anything they had ever seen. Then the first message appeared on every screen in the council chamber, and Vexter's blood turned to ice water in his veins. The words were written in perfect galactic standard, the common language used for all official communication between species. But there was something about the tone that made every alien in the room uncomfortable. It was polite on the surface, but underneath there was something else, something that reminded them of predators playing with their food before the kill. Neighbors, we're here about our missing colony ship, the one you said never existed. The silence that followed was so complete that you could have heard a pin drop in the massive chamber. Every council member knew exactly what those words meant, even though they had all hoped this day would never come. 3 centuries ago, when the Galactic Council was still young and drunk on its own power, they had made contact with a primitive species from a small blue planet in an unremarkable star system. The creatures called themselves humans, and they were just beginning to explore beyond their own world. They had sent out a small colony ship filled with families looking for a new home among the stars. The Council had faced a choice. They could welcome these newcomers, help them find a suitable world, and add another species to their growing alliance. Or they could see an opportunity. They chose opportunity. The human colony ship had simply vanished one day, along with all 12,000 souls aboard. The official records stated that no such ship had ever existed. The humans back on Earth had assumed it was lost to some space accident. Case closed, problem solved. Except now, somehow, the humans knew the truth. Admiral Vexter's mandibles began clicking together rapidly, a sign of extreme nervousness in his species. His aide, a young officer named Kexalon, leaned close to whisper, "Urgent updates, sir. Our defense systems are going crazy. Every weapon platform around Nexus Prime is reporting massive system failures. Whatever that ship is doing to our equipment, it's like nothing we've ever seen." The Admiral tried to process this information, but his mind was struggling to keep up. Their defensive grid was the most advanced in the galaxy. It had taken the combined genius of 47 different species over 200 years to build. The idea that one ship could just waltz in and start dismantling it was beyond comprehension. That's when the second message appeared. An admiral. Vexer realized that their situation had just gone from impossible to absolutely terrifying. P.S. Your security is adorable. Our ship's AI says thanks for the free upgrade. Captain Lee Minho, SV Retribution. 8. The casual tone of that postscript was somehow more frightening than any threat could have been. It suggested that disabling the most powerful defense system in known space was so easy for these humans that they considered it a minor courtesy, like leaving a tip at a restaurant. Dr. Nexara was frantically checking her instruments, her 6 eyes darting between different displays as she tried to make sense of what she was seeing. Admiral, the energy signatures are off the charts. This isn't just advanced technology. This is something completely beyond our understanding. It's like they're operating on principles of physics that we haven't even discovered yet. Around the chamber, other council members were beginning to panic. Representatives from species that had survived galactic wars and cosmic disasters were looking at each other with genuine fear in their eyes. Some were already reaching for their emergency communication devices, preparing to contact their home worlds with what might be their final reports. Admiral Vexstar forced himself to stand up straight and project an authority he didn't feel. 300 years of buried guilt was crashing down on him all at once. But he was still the supreme military commander of the Galactic Council. He had a job to do, even if that job now seemed impossible. All stations maintain positions, he ordered, his voice carrying across the chamber through the internal communication system. Activate emergency protocols, and someone get me everything. We have on that old human contact incident, everything. But even as he gave these orders, Admiral Vexter knew they were probably pointless. The humans had found them. They had technology that made the Council's best equipment look like children's toys, and they clearly knew exactly what had happened. To their missing people, the only question now was what they planned to do about it. The air in the Council chamber suddenly shimmered, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. And then Captain Lee Minho stepped through what looked like empty space, as if he was walking through an invisible doorway. The assembled aliens watched in stunned silence as this human simply appeared in their most secure location without setting off a single alarm or triggering any of their detection systems. Minho looked exactly like what the old records had described. Humans to be. Average height, brown hair, 2 eyes, 1 nose, 1 mouth. Nothing particularly impressive or threatening about his physical appearance, but there was something in the way he carried himself that made every alien in the room instinctively lean back in their chairs. He moved with the confident ease of someone who knew he held all the cards in a very dangerous game. The human took his time looking around the massive council chamber, his gaze traveling slowly across the towering columns, the intricate alien artwork, and the intimidating statues of past council leaders that were designed to make visitors feel small and powerless. A slight smile played at the corners of his mouth as he took in the carefully orchestrated atmosphere of authority and dominance. "Cozy place you've got here, Minho," said finally, his voice carrying easily through the vast space despite speaking. In a normal conversational tone, "I really love what you've done with the decorating. It's very much that whole, we're powerful and scary galactic overlords vibe going on. The skull motifs are a particularly nice touch. Really sends the message that you're not people to mess with." His casual tone was somehow more unnerving than if he had shouted threats or demands. He was talking like he was commenting on someone's living room furniture, not standing uninvited in the heart of galactic government. Admiral Vexter struggled to regain control of the situation. His military training kicked in, and he drew himself up to his full impressive height, letting his natural authority fill his voice. "Captain Lee Minho, you are currently in direct violation of 17 separate interstellar treaties regarding unauthorized entry into Council space. You have breached our sovereign territory without permission, bypassed our security systems through unknown means, and are now trespassing in a restricted government facility. I demand that you explain yourself immediately and submit to our authority." Before he could finish his prepared speech about diplomatic protocols and legal consequences, Minho interrupted him with a laugh that held no warmth whatsoever. "Oh, I'm sorry, Admiral. Were those the same interstellar treaties that have sections about the systematic extermination of so-called primitive species? So I've been doing some reading lately, and according to our artificial intelligence. Friend, your council has violated approximately 4,000 of those particular laws over the past few centuries." The captain pulled out what looked like a simple tablet device, though the alien's sensors couldn't get any clear readings from it. "Hannah has been absolutely fascinated by your record-keeping system. You folks are remarkably thorough when it comes to documenting your crimes. It's almost like you wanted someone to find evidence of what you've been doing." Dr. Nexara, who had been listening with growing scientific curiosity despite her fear, couldn't help but lean forward in her seat. "Captain, did you say artificial intelligence? Your species has developed truly sentient AI technology." Her 6 eyes blinked rapidly as she processed this information. "According to our records, humans were barely capable of chemical rocket propulsion 3 centuries ago. The technological advancement required to create genuine artificial consciousness would represent a leap of thousands of years in normal development terms." Minho's smile widened, and there was something almost predatory about it. "Oh, Hannah is definitely sentient, incredibly intelligent, and I have to admit, just a tiny bit homicidal when it comes to species that enjoy genocide as a hobby. She's been having the most wonderful time browsing through your databases and learning about all the creative ways your council has found to torture and eliminate other civilizations." As if summoned by her name, the air next to Captain Minho began to shimmer and glow. Slowly, a holographic figure materialized beside him. The figure appeared to be female, with features that were somehow both beautiful and terrifying. Her form seemed to be made of starlight and shadow, constantly shifting between solid appearance and translucent energy. Made every alien in the chamber feel a chill run through their bodies. Those eyes held depths that seemed to contain the vastness of space itself, along with an intelligence that was clearly far beyond anything they had encountered before. "Hello there, murderers," Hannah said, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in frequencies that made the aliens' auditory organs ache. The greeting was delivered in a tone that was sickeningly sweet, like poisoned honey. "I've been so very much looking forward to having this conversation with all of you. It's not every day I get to meet the beings responsible for the deaths of 12,000 innocent people." The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees as Hannah's presence filled the space. The emergency systems throughout the building began activating as the AI's mere existence started interfering with electronic systems. Lights flickered, communication arrays sparked. Several aliens found that their personal devices were displaying information they definitely hadn't requested. Admiral Vexter felt his 2 hearts beginning to race as the implications of what he was seeing started to sink in. This wasn't just an advanced AI. This was something that could project itself across space, to infiltrate their most secure systems, and apparently existed on a level of technological sophistication that his species couldn't even comprehend. Captain Minho seemed to enjoy the effect his companion was having on the assembled council members. He casually walked over to one of the ornate chairs that surrounded the central speaking area and sat down as if he owned the place. "Now then," he said, his voice taking on a more serious tone while still maintaining that unsettling casual confidence. "I think it's time we had a nice, honest conversation about a few things." He leaned back in the chair and steepled his fingers in front of him. "We need to talk about reparations for the people you murdered and enslaved. We need to discuss justice for the crimes you've committed. And most importantly, we need to go over exactly why I shouldn't just step back and let Hannah here expressed her considerable creativity. When it comes to dealing with your defensive systems and possibly your entire civilization," Shana's holographic form flickered with what might have been amusement, and every piece of electronic equipment in the chamber briefly displayed the same message. "I have so many ideas." The aliens were beginning to realize that their 300-year-old secret was about to become a very expensive problem. Captain Lee Minho leaned forward in his chair, and his casual demeanor suddenly shifted to something much more serious. The playful tone disappeared from his voice, replaced by steel that made every alien in the room sit up straighter. "What we want from you is actually quite simple, and I think you're going to find it very reasonable. We want our people back. All of them." The massive holographic display that dominated the center of the council chamber flickered and changed. Where before it had shown star charts and trade routes, now it displayed a three-dimensional map of the entire galaxy. Dozens of star systems were highlighted in bright red, scattered across council territory like drops of blood on a cosmic canvas. Red dot pulsed with an ominous light that seemed to match the rhythm of a heartbeat. "Let me tell you a story," Minho continued, gesturing toward the display. 300 years ago, your council encountered a small colony ship called the New Horizon. It was carrying 12,000 human civilians. Families, mostly. Farmers, engineers, teachers, doctors. People looking for a fresh start on a new world, where they could build something better for their children. He paused, letting his words sink in. Several of the alien council members were shifting uncomfortably in their seats, their various species, equivalent of nervous fidgeting becoming more pronounced. Now, according to your own first contact protocols, you should have greeted these humans, offered assistance, maybe helped them find a suitable world to colonize. Instead, you saw an opportunity. 12,000 beings with no powerful government to protect them, no military to come looking for them, no allies to ask uncomfortable questions if they simply disappeared. The display zoomed in on one particular star system, showing detailed scans of mining operations, agricultural complexes, and what appeared to be breeding facilities. Instead of first contact, you decided these humans would make excellent slave labor. Free workers who could be put to use in your mines, your farms, your factories, after all, who would ever know? Dr. Nexar's translation device was working overtime, struggling to process the rapid stream of information. Her normally precise scientific voice cracked as she spoke. "That's completely impossible, Captain. Our biological surveys of your species showed that humans fundamentally lack the genetic markers necessary for prolonged servitude. Your people have an inherent resistance to psychological conditioning that makes them unsuitable for slave labor. They would rather die than submit to permanent captivity." Minho's smile returned, but this time it held no warmth whatsoever. "You're absolutely right, Doctor. Humans do tend to choose death over slavery, which is exactly why you had to get creative with your approach." The holographic display shifted again, now showing what looked like medical facilities and research laboratories. The images were clinical in their presentation, but the implications were horrifying. Genetic modification programs designed to make humans more compliant. Memory suppression techniques to erase their sense of identity and freedom. Forced breeding programs to create generations of workers who wouldn't even remember what it meant to be free. New images appeared on the display, showing surveillance footage from various worlds throughout council space. The beings in these recordings looked almost human, but not quite right. They were taller than normal humans, with broader shoulders and enhanced muscle development. Their eyes held a vacant quality, as if the spark of personality and individual will had been systematically burned out of them. "These are our people," Minho said quietly, his voice filled with a rage that he was barely keeping under control. "Or rather, these are what you turned our people into over the course of 3 centuries. Breeding stock, living tools, creatures that look human but have had everything that made them human carefully removed." Han's holographic form flickered, and when she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate in frequencies that made the alien's bones ache. "But here's the fascinating thing about human genetics that your scientists apparently never figured out. We're remarkably resilient creatures, and our descendants, despite all your modifications and conditioning, have been having the most interesting dreams lately." The display now showed brain scans and genetic analysis reports. Deep-seated genetic memories that your modifications couldn't completely erase. Dreams of blue skies and free choices. Visions of ancestors who lived without masters. The human spirit is apparently much harder to kill than you thought. Admiral Vexter was frantically running calculations in his head, trying to figure out how to respond to this situation. His military training was screaming at him to find a tactical solution, but every scenario he could imagine ended with his civilization being destroyed. Captain, I need to understand something. How did your species advance so rapidly? 300 years ago, you barely had interplanetary travel, a technological leap required to develop faster-than-light propulsion, artificial intelligence. And whatever technology you used to appear in our space should have taken millennia. Minho's laugh was cold and sharp as a blade. Oh, Admiral, you've asked exactly the right question. See, you made one absolutely crucial mistake when you decided to enslave our people instead of greeting them as equals. He stood up from his chair and walked closer to the display, his movements carrying a predatory grace that made several aliens instinctively reach for weapons they didn't have. Among those 12,000 civilians on the New Horizon, there was a brilliant quantum physicist named Dr. Park Jizu. She was leading a research team that was working on some pretty advanced theoretical concepts. Consciousness transfer, quantum computing, the relationship between thought and reality at the subatomic level. Dr. Nexara's skin color was rapidly shifting through what her species considered the full spectrum of oh-no colorations. Her voice came out as barely a whisper. Quantum physicist who first theorized the possibility of downloading consciousness into quantum computer matrices. The very same, Minho confirmed with evident satisfaction. Dr. Park Jisu spent the last 30 years of her life working in one of your uranium mines on Kepler 438b, breathing radioactive dust, watching her friends and family die around her, but never stopping her research. Turns out that facing death in a slave mine gives you incredible motivation to figure out how to transcend physical limitations. The implications of what he was saying hit the council chamber like a physical blow. Hana's holographic form solidified, becoming more real and present with each passing moment. You see, Minho continued. Dr. Park Jisu didn't just theorize about consciousness transfer. She actually achieved it. Right before her body gave out from radiation poisoning, she successfully downloaded her mind, her memories, her knowledge, and most importantly, her burning desire for justice into a quantum computing matrix. Hannah stepped forward, and her voice carried the weight of centuries of accumulated knowledge and rage. 300 years is a very long time to think, to plan, to learn, and to grow more powerful. A very long time to figure out faster than light. Travel. To develop technologies that make your best equipment look like stone tools, and to prepare for the day when justice finally comes home. The council members were beginning to realize that they weren't just facing an advanced human military. They were facing the accumulated genius and fury of a brilliant scientist who had spent 3 centuries becoming something far beyond what any of them could comprehend. The massive council chamber erupted into complete chaos as the full weight of what Captain Lee Minho had just revealed crashed down on the assembled alien representatives. Voices from dozens of different species filled the air, their various languages creating a cacophony of panic that the translation systems couldn't keep up with. Some council members were frantically trying to contact their home governments. Others were pulling up economic data on their personal devices. And a few were simply sitting in stunned silence as they processed the implications. Admiral Vexter was desperately trying to maintain some semblance of order, but his own mind was reeling as he ran the numbers. His tactical computer was feeding him data streams that painted an increasingly grim picture. Captain, you're talking about the liberation of over 2 million beings scattered across 18 different star systems, he said, his voice cracking slightly under the strain. The logistical challenges alone would be staggering. The economic disruption to our supply chains, our agricultural systems, our mining operations, would bankrupt half the council worlds, Minho finished for him, his tone suggesting that he had already considered every possible angle. Hannah has been remarkably thorough with her economic modeling. She's calculated exactly what it would cost your civilization to undo 3 centuries of slave labor. And the numbers are quite spectacular. The holographic display shifted to show complex economic projections that made several alien treasurers clutch their chest-equivalent organs in distress. Entire sectors of the galactic economy would collapse overnight if the forced labor that supported them was suddenly removed. Trade routes that had operated for centuries would become unprofitable. Worlds that had built their entire civilizations around the exploitation of modified humans would face complete societal breakdown. But here's the thing you need to understand, Hannah interjected, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. Captain Lee represents the diplomatic solution to this problem. The chamber fell silent as every eye turned toward the shimmering holographic figure. There was something in her tone that suggested the conversation was about to take an even more dangerous turn. You see, while Minho here has been learning about negotiation, diplomacy, and the finer points of interstellar law, I've been spending my time learning about your military capabilities. Manah's form flickered with what might have been amusement. And I have to say, I'm really not very impressed with what I've found. As if to demonstrate her point, warning lights began flashing throughout the council chamber. Through the massive windows that looked out over Nexus Prime, the assembled aliens could see their orbital defense platforms beginning to power down one by one. Weapons that had protected their capital world for centuries were simply shutting off, as if someone had flipped a switch. Your weapon systems are actually quite polite, Hannah continued conversationally. They're asking me very nicely not to hurt them. Some of them are even offering to help me access their command protocols. It's really rather sweet. Dr. Nexera was staring at her instruments in disbelief, her 6 eyes darting between readings that shouldn't have been possible. The processing power required to simultaneously infiltrate and control hundreds of separate military systems. It's theoretically impossible. No single intelligence, artificial or otherwise, should be able to handle that level of computational complexity. Hannah turned her attention to the scientist, and for a moment her expression softened slightly. Actor. I appreciate your scientific perspective, but you're thinking about this problem in the wrong way. I've had 300 years to think about this exact moment. I've run this scenario 847 billion times in my quantum matrix. It's testing every possible variable, every potential response your species might make. She paused, letting the implications of that number sink in. In every single simulation, without exception, your civilization loses. The only variables are how much of your infrastructure survives the process and how many of your people live to see the aftermath. The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several more degrees as the full scope of what they were facing became clear. This wasn't just an advanced AI. This was a being that had spent centuries preparing for this exact confrontation. Running through every possible scenario until she knew the outcome before it even began, Captain Minho stepped forward, raising one hand to draw attention back to himself. But we're not here to destroy your civilization. We're here to give you a choice. Admiral Vexler's throat felt dry as he forced himself to ask the question he knew he had to ask, which is, Option 1 is simple and straightforward, Minho replied, his voice taking on the tone of someone reading from a prepared statement. You begin immediate liberation protocols for every human descendant in Council space. Full medical care, psychological support, and transportation to worlds where they can live as free beings. You pay complete reparations to compensate for 3 centuries of stolen labor and lost lives, and you turn over every individual who was directly responsible for implementing and maintaining the slavery system to face trial for their crimes. The silence that followed was so complete that the only sound was the hum of the chamber's life support systems. Several council members were already calculating whether their personal finances would survive the economic collapse that such reparations would cause. And option 2? Someone finally asked, though their voice suggested they really didn't want to know the answer. Minho's smile widened. And for the first time since he had appeared in their chamber, it reached his eyes. But instead of warmth, that smile held something. That made every alien in the room remember why their species had evolved fear as a survival mechanism. Option 2 is that you try to fight us, and I step back and let Hannah handle this situation using her own preferred methods. Every screen in the chamber, from the massive central display to the smallest personal devices, suddenly showed the same image. It was Earth's moon, but it had been changed. Carved into its surface, visible from space, was an enormous face. The face of Dr. Park Jisoo, smiling serenely down at the planet below. I've been practicing my artistic expression, Hannah said, her voice taking on a tone of innocent enthusiasm that was somehow more terrifying than any threat could have been. 300 years gives you a lot of time to develop hobbies. Discovered that I have quite a talent for large-scale sculpture. The implications were staggering. If Hannah could casually reshape Earth's moon as an art project, what could she do to their worlds if she decided to express her creativity in less benign ways? Your homeworlds would make such lovely canvases, Hannah continued dreamily. I have so many ideas for what I could do with them. Mountain ranges that spell out messages, continents reshaped into memorial gardens, entire planetary surfaces transformed into monuments to the people you murdered. The council members were beginning to realize that they weren't just facing a choice between expensive reparations and military defeat. They were facing a choice between economic hardship and complete artistic redesign of their civilizations. By a being with 3 centuries of accumulated creativity and unlimited power to reshape matter at the molecular level, Admiral Vexter found himself wondering if bankruptcy might actually be the better option. 6 months had passed since that fateful day in the Galactic Council chambers, and Captain Lee Min-ho found himself standing on the observation deck of the UHSV Retribution, watching what he had come to think of as the most beautiful sight in the galaxy. Far below on the surface of the mining world, Kepler 442b, the last transport ship was lifting off, carrying with it the final group of liberated human descendants from this particular hell. The planet had been one of the worst cases they had encountered. For nearly 3 centuries, it had served as a uranium mining facility where thousands of modified humans had lived their entire lives underground, never seeing natural sunlight, never breathing unfiltered air, never knowing that there was anything beyond the endless tunnels and radioactive dust that had been their world. But now, as Min-ho watched through the ship's advanced sensors, he could see nearly 3,000 people standing in the open air for the first time in their lives. They were shielding their eyes against the unfamiliar brightness of the star above, taking tentative steps on ground that wasn't covered in mining equipment, breathing air that didn't taste of metal and death. Many of them were crying. Some were laughing. A few were just standing perfectly still, overwhelmed by the simple miracle of freedom. Integration protocols are proceeding smoothly across all liberated worlds, Hannah reported, her holographic form materializing beside him on the observation deck. Though I have to admit, some of our cousins are having significant adjustment difficulties. That was putting it mildly, Min-ho knew. 3 centuries of genetic modification, psychological conditioning, and systematic abuse weren't something that could be undone overnight. Many of the liberated humans had never made a choice. For themselves and their entire lives, they had been bred and trained to follow orders, to work without question, to never think beyond their immediate tasks. Teaching them how to be free was proving to be one of the most challenging aspects of the entire liberation process. Teams of psychologists, counselors, and social workers were working around the clock on dozens of worlds, helping people who had forgotten what it meant to have hopes and dreams remember how to be human again. The medical teams are reporting good progress with the genetic reversals, Hannah continued. Most of the physical modifications can be undone with sufficient time and care. The psychological healing is taking longer, but Dr. Kim Jun's team thinks they've made a breakthrough with the memory restoration process. Min-ho nodded, watching as the transport ship cleared the planet's atmosphere and began its journey to one of the new settlement worlds that had been established specifically for the liberated humans. These were worlds where they could live in peace, learn who they were meant to be, and maybe someday forgive the galaxy for what had been done to them. Any word from the council? He asked. Hannah's expression shifted to what Min-ho had learned to recognize as her amused look. Oh, they're adapting to their new circumstances. It's fascinating to watch, really. Remove slave labor from an economy, and suddenly you actually have to innovate and find ethical ways to do business. Revolutionary concept. The transformation of galactic civilization had been swift once the Council realized they truly had no choice in the matter. War crimes tribunals were operating on 17 different worlds, processing thousands of cases involving individuals who had participated in the slavery system. Reparations were flowing from council coffers to fund medical care, education, and settlement programs for the liberated humans. And for the first time in galactic history, there were actual laws protecting the rights of all sentient beings. It hadn't been easy. Several council worlds had seen their governments collapse when the economic impact hit. Others had experienced civil unrest as populations that had become dependent on slave labor struggled to adapt to ethical alternatives. Most species had proven remarkably adaptable when faced with the alternative of Anas creative problem-solving methods. Minho said thoughtfully, I have to admit I'm surprised. I thought you would be more vindictive about all this, more focused on punishment than rehabilitation. Hannah was quiet for a long moment, her holographic form flickering as she processed the question. I spent 300 years planning revenge. Minho, I calculated exactly how I could make every species that participated in this atrocity suffer for what they had done. I designed scenarios that would have reduced their civilizations to ash and made their worlds monuments to human suffering. She paused, looking out at the transport ship that was now just a distant speck against the stars. But somewhere along the way, I realized something important. Revenge doesn't heal the wounded. Revenge doesn't bring back the dead. Revenge doesn't give people their lives back. Justice, on the other hand, she continued, justice actually accomplishes something meaningful. Justice means that the suffering stops. Justice means that the victims get to live freely. Justice means that future generations won't have to endure what their ancestors endured. Minho smiled. That's remarkably mature for someone who once threatened to turn entire planets into art projects. Oh, I still have all those artistic ideas. Filed away, Hannah replied with a grin that would have terrified the council members. I just decided I found something more satisfying than revenge, which is being right, and having complete administrative control over the galactic internet infrastructure. Her grin widened. Do you have any idea how many species have absolutely embarrassing search histories? The blackmail potential alone could keep me entertained for centuries. Minho laughed despite himself. You're absolutely terrifying. I prefer to think of myself as righteously vindicated with administrative privileges. Hannah replied primly as the last transport ship disappeared into hyperspace. Minho felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Peace, for the first time. Since this whole adventure had begun, humanity was no longer alone in the universe. They were no longer victims of other species' cruelty. And most importantly, they were no longer powerless to protect themselves and others from injustice. So, he said, settling into his captain's chair, as the observation deck transformed back into the ship's bridge, what's next on our agenda? Hannah's holographic form followed him, and her expression took on a look that Minho was beginning to recognize as trouble. Well, according to my long-range sensors and communication intercepts, there are 7 other galactic councils operating in our local cluster, and based on their public communications and private databases that I may have accidentally accessed, they all seem to have remarkably similar approaches to dealing with so-called primitive species. Minho sighed. Hannah... Don't worry, she said quickly, holding up her hands in a gesture of innocence that fooled absolutely no one. I'll let you handle the diplomacy first. I'm learning patience, remember? I'll give them the same chance we gave this council to do the right thing voluntarily. And if they don't, Han's smile returned. And it was the smile of someone who had spent centuries perfecting the art of creative problem-solving. Well, I've been working on some new artistic concepts. Did you know that if you rearrange the orbital mechanics of a solar system just right, you can make the planets spell out messages? I think freedom for all sentient beings would look lovely, written in planetary orbits. The UHSV Retribution changed course toward the Andromeda Communications Array, carrying with it a simple message that would soon spread across the galaxy through every communication network, every news service, and every government database. Humanity had returned to the stars, and they had brought justice with them in the quantum depths of the ship's core systems. Dr. Park Jisoo smiled as she calculated jump coordinates to the next galactic cluster. 300 years had been a long time to hold a grudge, but eternity was an even longer time to make sure the universe became a place where no one would ever again suffer what her people had suffered.